back again to talk about an issue that we have to talk about. The winds of war are blowing. I think it's a little less likely than it was a couple weeks ago. I think things have happened that have actually calmed things down, and that's a good thing. But nevertheless, it's a danger. It's a danger that we will continue to face, and those who want this war will not give up very easily. The tragic irony of the fact that the war in Iraq that was supposed to secure an American century, that's what it was about. It was the Project for New American Century said that we needed to display American power, to establish American hegemony that would last us for the next century. The danger of, at the end of the Cold War, of a multipolar world emerging needed to be combated, and a way to do it was an overwhelming display of force and a sense that America was in fact the dominant force. The tragic irony is that that war that was supposed to establish the American century did exactly the opposite. It left us weaker. It left us less respected. It left our army in shambles, and we see one of the byproducts of that in this terrible atrocity that occurred in Afghanistan just a short while ago. I mean, 4 tours of duty? What the hell's that all about? My office is in the building in Washington that has a legal services agency for veterans. When I've been in that building way too long now. It's 85 is when I moved in, and when I did move in and got to know those folks, the homeless and those who were drug addict homeless or mentally disturbed homeless were Vietnam War veterans. It was a largely male population. And in the last couple of years, that dynamic has shifted, and it's now Iraq and Afghan war veterans. This problem will be with us a long time. These young men and women were sent to fight in wars we had no business being in because we did not understand what we were getting ourselves into. And terrorism that we were supposed to defeat has been metastasized. Yeah, we got Osama bin Laden, but Pakistan's in shambles. And Al-Qaeda is now in the Gulf. And Al-Qaeda is in North Africa. And there are extremist cells still in Iran and elsewhere. And speaking of Iran, it has been emboldened. I mean, the major consequence of the war in Iraq has been to unleash Iran and to give it sort of dreams of regional hegemony. Now, it's interesting because, you know, the rivalry between Iran and Iraq was something that held both in check in 8 years of a god-awful bloody war between two regimes that played off of each other rather violently. Now Iran is freed of that. Freed on the one hand of the Taliban in Afghanistan and of Saddam in Iraq. And that's one byproduct of the war. 2 failed wars later, the neoconservatives who brought us the war still haven't given up. Part because of Bush holdovers, in part because of the fact that too many Democratic hawks, folks he ran against in the campaign who disagreed with him about Iran, were now in key positions in the administration, in part because of pressure from Congress. The president ultimately gave way to what he had said he would not give way to, and that is sanctions before negotiations. And sanctions as a way to get to negotiations, which only stiffen the Iranians worse. Now, the Iranians are their own best enemies, because what they ended up doing was, by the time we were moving this along, that debacle of an election, in quotes, in 2009 resulted in those scenes of horror that shocked everyone, making it very difficult to engage in a regime with a regime that was so brutalizing its own people. And so the path towards sanctions and stiffening sanctions and then getting the United Nations to agree to even tougher sanctions continued unabated. And by the time you got to the point where the Brazilians and the Turks had succeeded in getting the Iranians to say yes to the very deal that the United States had been trying to get them to say yes to, the deal was cooked. The Russians and the Chinese were already on board. The Senate was ready to pass resolutions here in America stiffening sanctions, and the president gave way to sanctions. Their behavior at home and their behavior in the neighborhood was problematic. I know some have been troubled by an expression I used, that they're both meddlesome and menacing, but frankly, if you live in the neighborhood, they are. And the behavior in the Gulf and the behavior in Iraq and the behavior in Lebanon has not been conducive to having Iran be viewed as a trusted neighbor. But my issue is that the biggest mistake we made was not only not to engage, but when we did try to engage, what we engaged on, and that was the nuclear issue only. And to some degree, that was a victory for Congress and those in Congress who wanted that to be the single focus, because that's what AIPAC had been pushing for, and a victory for Israel, because that's the issue Israel had been pushing for, and a victory for some Arab states, because that was the issue they'd been pushing for. The real problem is we should have been engaging with Iran on a whole range of issues. We should have been talking to them about Iraq. You know, one of the big recommendations of the Iraq study group was to form a regional contact group and have the Iranians and the Saudis and the Turks and the Jordanians and everyone sitting around a table working in a systematic and continuing way as we did in Eastern and Western Europe by creating a framework for regional security. We should have been doing that with Iraq. Would have been the best way out. Because Iraq is a problem in the neighborhood, not just a problem in Iraq itself. Everyone in Iraq has an ally in the neighborhood that ends up fueling the conflict. And so when that was proposed, people said, oh, we can't have the Iranians involved in Iraq. They're already in Iraq. And the Saudis are already in Iraq. And the Turks are already in Iraq. Everybody's in Iraq. But they're doing it under the table. Better to have them sitting around a table where you actually can create a framework that ties everyone's hands together, because all of them ultimately have an interest not in getting a piece of Iraq, but getting stability in the region. We failed at that because we would not engage Iran on the broader issues. We would only talk to them on the nuclear question. We had one meeting with them in Iraq, and then it was over. We had a couple of meetings with them on Afghanistan, and then it was over. We've never sat down and talked with them about their involvement in the rest of the region. And the point is that if you engage Iran, you have to engage with them on their broader involvement, a part of which is the nuclear question, but only a part of it. When you focus on the one issue, you almost lose the debate from the get-go. When the rhetoric gets so out of whack, you end up on a collision course. Because you can't say we should talk to Iran and be in politics. Because people look at you like you have four heads. I can do it in Des Moines, tough to do it in Washington. I've been in Washington for almost 3.5 decades, a little more than 3.5 decades now. And every time we've gone to war, I remember presidents either saying Congress didn't matter or pushing, prodding, screaming until Congress would give them the authorization to do it. I never remember Congress literally giving the authorization to go to war without being asked to do it. And they're doing it now. And your own Chuck Grassley's on the bill. And your own Steve King is on the bill. But thank God nobody else. They do not want negotiations. They do not want containment. They want a war. And they're making the case that only by holding out the threat of war will we ultimately get Iran to bend, which is a hell of a way to do diplomacy, because they don't ultimately believe in diplomacy. They still believe in the fact that force is the only way to get your objectives met. The resolution that we ought to be supporting is Barbara-Lee's, which specifically rules out any hostilities, any war. She's got 9 sponsors. None from Iowa. The other resolution has a couple hundred sponsors. If you remember what happened at the AIPAC convention just a week or so ago, I mean, it was all Iran all the time. That's all it was about. I mean, Netanyahu succeeded in taking peace process off the table. I mean, this is the first time he came to Washington in the last 3 years where he wasn't pushed either to recognize a Palestinian state, stop settlements, or recognize the 67 border. Those were the last 3 visits. This visit was Iran. Is he going to bomb it or isn't he? And the president, for the first time, outmaneuvered him. The red line Netanyahu wanted was that Iran should have no nuclear program. And the position of the White House has been that Iran should have no nuclear weapon. And there's a fundamental difference between the two. They do not want them to have an enrichment program, and Iran says they have a right to an enrichment program. The question is what kind of enrichment program, not whether they should have the right to it. But Israel wants no enrichment for Iran, and that's the position that Congress is taking. The bill says no enrichment. And that cannot be the case because it simply does not comply with the agreements that have been reached to date in the international community. And it's not something that Iran will accept. But to limit the enrichment is something that can be done and can be negotiated. And the president stuck to his guns on that. People thought he'd give, he didn't. Iran's not the good guy in this story. And there are actually not a whole lot of good guys in this story. I'm not sure there's any, to be honest. It is meddlesome. And it can be menacing. And it is seeking hegemony. And it seeks to project its power in the Gulf region. And the interesting way that it does it is by using Israel as a foil. I gave an interview to Haaretz a couple of years ago, and the part they plucked out that made the headline in the paper was, Israel's not the target, it's the foil. He uses Iran, he uses Israel because his audience is on the other side of the Gulf. It's disgruntled Arab masses who feel that their governments have sold out to America. Ahmadinejad or Iran needs Israel as a foil. Israel needs Iran as a foil. And so they hyperventilate over this big threat. And the fact is that Israel's got 200, maybe 300 nuclear weapons themselves, from what we know. They've never signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Bill. They've never, the Non-Proliferation Act, they've never done it. And they have no intention of doing it. And the simple fact is that if Iran had a bomb, my argument has always been, so what? Soviets had 30,000, and we contained them. What's he going to do? Sit on it? Is he going to eat it? Going to feed his people with it? Could he do any more damage with it than he already does or tries to do? The answer is no. And if he used it, 5 minutes later he's a parking lot. I mean, the point is that there is an issue here that says to us, we've got two guys going at each other, using it to feed their domestic bases, and we're stuck in the middle, acting as if both are serious and ought to be somehow, we ought to, the point is everybody ought to calm down. Because if everybody calmed down and we thought about it, we actually might come up with a deal. And there has to ultimately be a deal. Iran should not have a bomb. I'm absolutely am a firm believer on that. It's stupid to have a nuclear bomb. Number one, you can't use it. It's no good to anybody. And number two, he wants it for bragging rights, so you take the bragging rights away. You say, you take the bragging rights away by ridicule. What are you going to do with it? You want it real bad? Here, we'll give you a stockpile one. What are you going to do with it? You can't do anything with it. But if the point is the degree to which we play into it, we reinforce exactly what he wants, which is attention. And give Netanyahu everything he wants, which is attention. And pick sides, which is exactly what both guys want. And we're on a collision course which we have to back away from. And so the point is that we ought not to be in this game. They don't have a bomb. Chuck Grassley sent a letter out to folks. I got this copy of a letter he sent out, totally misstating the case. Be honest about what it said. There is no evidence it said that they've gone back to building a weapons capacity. But they are hiding their enrichment process. We think that's true. And more inspections are the key, and negotiations are the key. But let's not get hysterical and start telling stories about things that just aren't true. When people say, he's got a bomb, he's going to get a bomb, he's got a bomb, we know he's got a bomb, the report said he had a bomb. No. And there does not yet appear to be evidence that they are seeking a weapon. And we give him the kind of attention he wants. He wants to be the baddest kid. My daughter teaches troubled kids. And she'll tell you all the time, what they want is, they want to be punished. They want you to pay attention to them in that way. But if she kills them with kindness or ignores them, sometimes it has a transformative effect in behavior. And it certainly affects everyone else's behavior around him because they know that when he's trying to get attention by being bad, you actually aren't going to give it to him. You don't give him what he wants. At the end of the day, there is no solution to this but negotiations and engagement. We'd bring the temperature down quite a bit, which is what we need. Look at that Barbara Lee bill and see about getting your member of Congress to sign on. And see what you can do to build a peace camp that's real. And if any of you are delegates yet here in Iowa and you've made it to the next round and you're going further, let's do a resolution at the state convention that puts your senator on notice that you want him on a companion bill that supports what Barbara Lee's trying to do, which is rule out the war option in Iran.